she made, showing something like what they encountered. Now, what is interesting here is that there are thousands and thousands of accounts of people who claim to have been taken on board spaceships. And it's very easy to debunk and laugh at, and yet when people with serious credentials have investigated this, it turns out that maybe there's more to the story. For instance, John E. Mack was a Harvard psychiatry professor, now sadly dead, but he spent many years investigating alien abduction cases. He faced a lot of ridicule for doing it, but he was skeptical. He thought it was all in the mind. But after interviewing hundreds of abductees, he came to the realization that whatever was going on, one thing was clear, that they believed it was a real experience. They weren't fantasizing, they weren't making it up. It was to them as real as this room is to us now. And he began to realize that whether or not it was some strange psychological, archetypal experience, or whether it really was literally occurring, almost didn't matter. You needed to look at what experiences were coming through from these encounters and what information was being gained from these encounters, because even if this was just something welling up through the collective consciousness, it still needed looking at. And what is interesting here, and what takes us on to the next part of the talk now really, is that one of the recurring themes is that again and again people that are taken on board these ships, as they believe, are shown visions of the future. And that these beings either tell them, or show them on a screen, or project psychically images of things that would happen to our planet in the near future. And there's been a number of people, like Billy Meyer, or John King, or Whitley Strieber, who've come back and written down what they remembered being told. And a lot of these things they wrote down have come true. For instance, some things like 9/11. Big events were shown to many abductees, and they seem to know that this was already going to happen. And this ties in with much information that's coming in from lots of other sources. Because again and again these days we hear about this idea that maybe some big change is imminent. And one of the recurring themes is that there will be a huge change to our world due to happen about now and in the next few years. And this is something that people are talking about again and again. And this is just one source. If you go back a little bit earlier to the early part of the 20th century, clairvoyants and mediums, psychics like Edgar Cayce, who we see here, made a number of predictions that the world at the end of the 20th and the beginning of the 21st century would undergo a huge transformation. And various things that Cayce and other psychics have written down have come true. He accurately predicted the Second World War, the Cold War and the rise of communism. A number of things that he seemed intuitively to know. Not everything was right, but enough things to make you think, well, maybe this should be looked at. And psychics and mediums all around the world for years now have been saying there's going to be something huge that changes the whole nature of the world. Ultimately, everything will be improved, will be better afterwards, but it will be an uncomfortable transition in between. But again and again, it's kind of this time period where we are today that has been pinpointed. Now this, of course, for many people ties in with the prophecies concerning the year 2012. And there's much conflicting information about 2012 and why that date matters, but the key thing is this, that many people believe that an ancient time cycle recorded by many different cultures around the world holds the key to, if you like, a message from the past. Now, most famously, people speak about the Maya prophecies. But actually, although the Maya recorded this cycle of time in their calendrical systems very accurately, it's not just the Maya. The Maori in New Zealand record the same time cycle. The Chinese encoded it into the I Ching. Various Native American tribes have clear links to this same cycle of time. So what's that about? This cycle seems to be 5,125 years. And there are some arguments about when it really began and when it really ended. But many people believe, if you work out the old calendars with today's calendars, that we're just about to enter a time when that time period ends and begins again. And there are various prophecies around the world which say that when this occurs, something big happens to the world. Now, whether there's any truth to it or not, the fact is lots of people believe it. And the turning of the next cycle, in many people's opinion, is 21st of December 2012. And Hollywood has now leaped on the bandwagon with the new movie 2012, which is all big, apocalypse, earthquakes. And of course, some people do believe this could occur. But the other side of the 2012 prophecies is that many of the prophecies say that we will all be collectively transformed, that our species will raise to a new level of consciousness, and that it will ultimately be a very positive thing. So all of this is currently milling about in our collective consciousness. There's so much feeling that something's about to happen. But of course, prophecies and predictions are nothing new. If you look back at the Bible, packed with prophecy and prediction. But religious prophecy is maybe not always in the ancient past. What I think is interesting is that a lot of all this talk from aliens and psychics and 2012 people ties in with something which occurred in Portugal, at Fatima, in 1917. And many of you will know of this, but what is key to this, for those that don't know, is that on October the 13th, 1917, one of the most famous apparitions of what seemed to be the Virgin Mary appeared to thousands of people. Now, there have been, of course, many accounts of religious figures appearing in front of thousands of people over the years. But what marks the Fatima story out as different is that, for once, there's some very good evidence. Now here we see the three children, poor shepherd children, who began to have visions of at first an angel and then this glowing female being. But in fact, only in their last encounter did this being announce itself as Our Lady of the Rosary. She never used the name Mary, by the way, but it is presumed by religious people that it was Mary in the accepted sense of the mother of Jesus. Now the key thing is here, she gave the children information, secrets that they were to share with the Pope at the time, another Pope Benedict. And not unreasonably, the children said, yes, but nobody is going to believe us. And the being spoke and said, well, if you bring as many people as you can here, at this place, at this time, I will perform a miracle that will convince you all that what I am saying is true. And if you go to the cathedral at Fatima today, you will see this window commemorating what we are told occurred, the miracle of the sun. And thousands of people reported witnessing this object that they believed to be the sun, performing these incredible aerial maneuvers, acrobatics across the sky, throwing out incredible brilliant colours, swooping down like a falling leaf, and finally coming down very low over the heads of the crowd. Well, clearly it wasn't the sun, or the whole world would have noticed. But something occurred. And the reason we can be sure that something occurred is that, incredibly, it was all photographed. Here are some photographs showing the people waiting. They didn't really know what to expect, but they were hoping for a sign. And we even have a photograph of the object that they reported seeing. There we are. And this was filmed or photographed by somebody several miles away who didn't know what was going on. Because often people have said it was a mass hypnosis. But this man didn't know what was going on. He just saw something strange and photographed it. Now, you will notice if you look closely here, they have their umbrellas up. And that's because it was very wet while this was going on. It was pouring with rain. They were soaked. And yet, after this object passed very, very closely over their heads and went back into the sky, they instantly found their clothes were dry, the puddles had gone. And what is so interesting is, there are two things here that are so like UFO encounters that you have to wonder if there is a connection. because the behaviour of the light they saw is very like the behaviour of what some people call UFOs. And this sense of it drying things out when it gets very close is something that people who have had close encounters with UFOs have also reported. Now, this is not to say that it wasn't the Virgin Mary. I don't know. But maybe there are closer links between what happened at Fatima and the whole UFO phenomenon than we think. But what is key here is, of course, something happened, and therefore the information that the children were given maybe needs to be thought about. There are essentially three pieces of information. The first, secret of Fatima, was again, like Casey, a prediction of a Second World War. The second was a vision of the rise of communism, again, and a Cold War. And the third was kept secret by the Vatican for many years. And various Vatican staff dropped very heavy hints that the third secret was about something really big about to happen to the world. But then, about 12 years ago, the Vatican suddenly decided to tell us what the third secret was. But they played it down. They said that all that the third secret was in fact a vision of the assassination attempt on John Paul II in 1981. And that puzzled lots of people because they thought that does not fit with what Vatican officials themselves had been saying about it. And the person who had dropped the biggest hints of all about the real third secret of Fatima was this gentleman here. Cardinal Ratzinger as was, and of course better known today as, the Pope. Another Pope Benedict. Coincidence? Now what is interesting here is that Cardinal Ratzinger, when he was known as that, was the Vatican official that investigated the Fatima apparitions on behalf of the Vatican. And he spent years interviewing eyewitnesses, going back through old records, and it was he who verified the miracle on behalf of the Roman Catholic Church to say, yes, this was real. Yes, the information is something to be taken seriously. And therefore, given that he was the one that said that the third secret involved end times, big things due to happen, guess what? About now, here we have a man influencing millions of lives around the world who has a secret that he is not sharing. And this must, some way, under what he does, create an agenda. He knows or believes something that he is not sharing. Now, when will he share this information? This remains to be seen. So we have people around the world in very influential places of power who seem to know more than they're telling us. Now, he is not alone in this. I'm going to introduce you to one more person who has something in common. Let's see how many of you remember this gentleman here. Here we see Mr. Bush with a halo. We did not add it on. He just put his head in front of the presidential seal at the wrong moment. Or the right moment. But it's very apt. Because, does anybody remember when some Palestinian officials asked George W. Bush, why did you invade Iraq? Does anybody remember what his response was?
Weapons. Weapons of mass destruction.
Not quite. We'll come to that. No, in fact, he said God told him to invade Iraq. That's a big claim, isn't it? And it's shocking how short our memories are, because this was headline news, and none of us remember. And we're not supposed to remember things like this. We're always distracted into other things, and so we forget. But this was a big moment. So the President of the United States of America, as was, believes that God is personally telling him what to do for the good of the world. Now, lots of emperors and kings and leaders through time immemorial have thought that God was on their side. But was God really speaking to George W. Bush? Or, more likely, was it this gentleman here? This is the pastor Ted Haggard, a well-known evangelical preacher in America.